All right, welcome in, everybody. I am your host, Tony Patelis. As usual, this is the College Hoop News Podcast. We have another weekly recap tonight. It's been a few weeks, as you guys know, when I did my conference breakdown last week. Had some the holidays were going on. I got sick, so we haven't done the weekly recap in a few weeks now, but we're back tonight. A lot to talk about. We had a pretty good week in college hoops. We're about halfway through the season. So I have a guest with me tonight, Erik Halsam from HaslamMetrics.com. He joins me for the second time on the podcast. He joined us about a little over a month ago, I think. Erik runs the very interesting HaslamMetrics.com, as I said. Erik, how are you tonight?
How are you doing, Tony?
Good. A lot to talk about, so let's get started. Before we get started, I think, we can do what we did last time, Erik. If you can just maybe share who are the top 10 teams in your site as of today.
Yeah, sure. And like I said, everything that I do is based on analytics. It's an algorithm that I develop on my own, and it looks at everything is based largely on performance, not necessarily wins and losses. It's more of a gray area type of evaluation, as opposed to saying, hey, this team won or this team lost, so I'm going to move them up if they won, move them down if they lost. It looks at their performance versus the expectation. So that's how the analytics are designed. So as of this morning, Sunday morning. The number one team in the country is Purdue. Purdue takes number one for the first time all year. Villanova had held that spot since early December, but Purdue, after their win against Minnesota, took over number one. Number two is Villanova. Number three is Virginia. Four is Duke. Number five is Texas Tech. Number six is Michigan State. Seven, Wichita State. Number eight is Tennessee. Number nine is Ohio State, and number 10 is Kansas.
Yeah, so, talk about Kansas real quick, Erik, because I think, some people might be surprised that they're still, in that top 10. Why is that?
The reason for that, and you're going to look at my site, and the best metric of mine to explain why they are where they are is momentum. And you're going to look at it, and there's 351 Division I teams. And Kansas is 347th right now in positive momentum. And the reason I bring that up is because that shows you how dominant Kansas's performances were early on in the season, and we can't discount those. We have to keep in mind that was still the same Kansas team. But when you look at Kansas and you say, what were their best performances? If you go to the Kansas team summary page at HaslamMetrics.com, you're going to see that all five of their best performances were in the month of November. So I remember back then, going into December, when we started putting our rankings out there on the internet, that was the point where Kansas was far and away our number one. Their performances early on in the season were absolutely outstanding. And since then, they've had some relatively, clunkers. They've had losses in there. They've had a loss to Texas Tech. They had an unimpressive game recently against Iowa State. But because of how they performed early on in the season, and we still keep that in mind, that still holds some water, that's the reason why they remain so high in our rankings.
Yeah, and the other team I wanted to ask you about that seemed to be creeping up your rankings very quickly is Ohio State, maybe the most surprising team in the country this year. They've been playing excellent basketball. They had a hiccup against North Carolina, but, they beat Michigan State, Iowa, Miami of Ohio. They've been on a pretty good run here. They also beat Michigan. Talk about Ohio State a little bit and how fast they've creeped up your rankings.
Yeah, and see, they were kind of that team that was, the analytics liked a lot, long before the mainstream did. And what got them there largely was that win on December the 2nd when they played at Wisconsin in Madison. Wisconsin's not a great team this year, but that was a game where Ohio State dominated. The game was declared mathematically over with 12 and a half minutes to play, and Ohio State was up 33 points. That was the game that took them up into our top 25, and they've been in the top 25 ever since. And sure, they've got a few losses in there, but their losses are quality losses. They lost to Gonzaga, They've lost to Clemson, they lost to North Carolina, and then a loss to Butler. Those are all quality teams. And then you start talking about the wins they have, and the great wins they've had as of late. They've had the wins against Michigan State and Maryland, and then you had a win against Michigan in there as well, who's really climbing up in our rankings. So that is a team that is, I kind of always refer to them as this year's version of Florida. Right. My analytics last year in the month of January had Florida as a top 5 team, and a lot of people looked at it and said, Florida, no way, come on, man. And then there was that game in early February where Kentucky, the Kentucky team with Bam and Monk and Fox went down to Florida, and Florida buried them by 22. everybody jumped on that bandwagon at that point for Florida. So I think Ohio State, I think the moment where everybody got the wake-up call for Ohio State was Michigan State when they dominated Michigan State, and they haven't slowed down since. They had a very convincing win against Maryland, and then another one. They're dominant playing against Rutgers here. So yeah, they're a team that has continued to climb up in the ratings ever since they got in our top 25.
Yeah, and the other team, and I know you like them a lot, and I do too, and we've been talking about them quite a bit, is Tennessee. They've been in your top 10 for quite a while, correct?
Absolutely, they have been, and they're another team that has kind of just held on based on the quality of their performances, and they're kind of a team along the same lines as Kansas, in that most of their big performances, the ones they came out of the gates very quickly in the month of November. They've slowed down a little bit, but they are still hanging in there. They're a very solid team and a well-balanced team. 18th in offensive efficiency, 12th in defensive efficiency, and they have the number one schedule strength by my calculations. So, yeah, I like Tennessee. They have 4 losses, but at the same time, they're a very talented team.
Absolutely. All right, so let's get into some of these conferences now. Again, guys, if you want to follow Erik, he's at Haslam Metrics on Twitter, and haslammetrics.com is the website. So let's start with the Big 12. We had a big game yesterday with Texas Tech and West Virginia. I did want to ask you about the court storming situation, Erik, just to get your take on it. There was a lot of controversy on Twitter yesterday. You know, I'm all for court stormings in the right situation. You know, yesterday we have Texas Tech, who's ranked 8th in the country. They're favored by 5 points, and they beat West Virginia, and they stormed the court. There was a lot of controversy on social media, as I said. What do you think about that, and are you okay with it? Or are you like me, who says there's that right situation? Like if Rutgers beats Purdue, okay. If BC beats Duke, okay. But do you feel that it's okay that the 8th-ranked team in the country was favored? Their fans rushed the court against West Virginia?
Yeah, I think you and I are on the same page on this one. You know, I think you and I very much agree in that, you know, I'm not like Bill Walton. Bill Walton is anti-court storming in every situation. I hate that.
Yeah.
I think there's, you know, you got to show some enthusiasm. That's what the game is fun. Let the fans have some fun. He's worried. I'm sure he's worried about someone getting hurt, but how often does that really happen, honestly? But I'm with you on this one. You know, if you're going to rush the court in college basketball, no disrespect meant to West Virginia, but it's West Virginia. You know, if you're court storming and you're I don't know, you're a team that's right around 500 and you knocked off North Carolina, you knocked off Duke, I get it. You knocked off Villanova, I get it. But you're knocking off West Virginia, and on top of that, you're a Texas Tech team who's a top 10 team.
Right.
So I'm kind of the opinion of, hey, act like if you're really that good, act like you've been there before. Correct. So the fans rush the court. You know, I don't have a problem with court rushing, but when I saw it happen, that the first thought in my mind was, you're rushing the court after beating West Virginia. No, just my opinion. But, you know, I would not have rushed the court personally.
No, me neither. And I caught some flack from some Texas Tech fans. You know, they started talking about, well, you know, we haven't had a great history in basketball, and this is our biggest win in program history. And I said, what does it matter about the history? It matters about now. You're the 8th-ranked team in the country. You know, you were favored by 5 points. You shouldn't be rushing the court. It's just my opinion. I mean, it didn't bother me. I just thought they shouldn't have done it.
Yep. When they rushed the court, it was the first thought that ran in my mind was, you're rushing the court? You're top 10. What do you okay, fine, you know, I guess, but if it, you know, in certain situations, I remember back years ago in Wisconsin when they got a big win late in the season, I forgot who they beat. They might have beat Michigan State. This was probably in the last 10 years. And it was the big win. Maybe it was Minnesota. I can't remember. But it was such a big win that it was the tipping point about, hey, they might be in the tournament, they might not. But this was the clincher. This was the moment, like, yes, we're in. And they rushed the court. And they beat a team who was, you know, in the top 10. I get it. That situation makes sense. But here we are. We're talking, you know, early, mid-January. You know, we're barely into the Big 12 schedule. You're beating West Virginia. I don't know. I don't see it.
Yeah, I know. It was a little disappointing. But anyways, let's get into that game just real quick. You know, West Virginia pretty much controlled it most of the way, it seemed. Ace Ahmad returned from his suspension. He comes back. He played really well. He had 18 and 6. Javon Carter had 28. But Texas Tech woke up late. You know, they get a big win against, you know, the number 2 team in the country. Keenan Evans, as usual, made some big shots. They gave up 70 points, but it seems like when Texas Tech needs to get a stop, they can get it. They're an elite defensive team. What do you think about the matchup yesterday?
Well, it was, I think Texas Tech kind of came out a little bit tight, but they delivered, and that's the kind of games you have to win if you're going to be a contender in this league. Like you said, with that defense, they can really be a problem for a lot of teams, and they are right now our second-rated defense in the country behind Virginia, and we know how elite Virginia is. So it was a very positive performance. Texas Tech is winning those games winning those games this year that they didn't last year. And look at who they've beaten. They've beaten West Virginia. They've beaten Kansas. They've beaten Baylor. They've gotten a win against Nevada. I mean, just quality wins. Northwestern is a win in there. So, yeah, those are the wins they have to be a contender in this tournament. Those games they weren't winning last year. This year they are.
Definitely. And, some other teams I wanted to talk to you about with your site and everything. TCU is a team. And I think TCU is a prime example of how brutal the Big 12 is because they're 1-4 in the conference right now. I think they're still an excellent basketball team, but, they lost at Oklahoma. They lost at Texas after the news came out about Andrew Jones. So they've run into some really, really good teams and some really tough situations. How much have they slipped of late on your site?
You know what? Not too badly, and the reason why is because they've been competitive. They've slipped a little bit. They probably got as high as in the range of about 25. And I think a lot of people had them rated higher. The analytics never bought into them that much, but they performed along the lines of what a 25 seed would do. They've dropped a little bit. They're back in the 37 range right now, but I don't worry so much about TCU just yet. And the reason for that is they're still, based on the analytics, the sixth best team in the Big 12. The Big 12 is going to get a whole slew of bids in the tournament. And TCU did have that 12-0 start.
Right.
So that is, their record quality is solid. They're 32nd in record quality, 4-4 against the top 100. Right now, we have them projected as an 8 seed. Now, that's not as high as they once were. Yeah, they're right now projected as an 8 seed. And granted, I don't put too much stock in bracketology on January the 14th. It's still way too early. It's more of a February 1st discussion to have. But if you're going to talk bracketology, we do have them as an 8 seed right now. So they are in the tournament. So I'm not terribly worried about TCU just yet.
Okay. And now what about Baylor? Because Baylor is another team who I think is a solid club. But again, they're 1-4 in conference. But their resume isn't very good, in my opinion. I know they beat Creighton, and that's really it. What do you think about this Baylor team? Where are they right now?
Yeah, they're farther down than Texas Christian. Texas, like I said, TCU is 37. Baylor is 55. And they're the ninth best team based on the analytics in the Big 12, 11-6 record. The record quality is a problem for them. TCU, like I said, was 32nd in record quality. Baylor is 89th. That's not solid. They have a losing record against the top 100. We're not even talking top 50 here. We're talking top 100. They're 3-6 against the top 100. That's just not going to get it done. You have that win over Creighton. You got a win over Texas. But other than that, there isn't really anything there to go on for Baylor. And at this point, it's just not happening for them. They gotta make a move right now. Otherwise, they're going to be left out in March.
Yeah. Well, the good news is they're in the Big 12. They have plenty of opportunities for quality wins. So we'll see if the Bears can turn it around. I still like this team. I think they're a legitimate NCAA tournament factor, but they got to pile up those wins, as you said. Before we move on, Eric, Oklahoma is a team that's been tremendous this year. Big surprise. I thought they'd be an NCAA tournament team, but I didn't think they'd be a top, 5-6 team like they are right now. But again, the defense concerns me. They give up over 80 points a game, and I don't think a team like that can make a deep run and win it, get to a Final Four. Do you agree with that? What do you think about this Oklahoma team?
I do. I think their offense is solid. They're a top 10 offense, but yeah, you're talking defensive efficiency, 53rd. Not terrible, but just not elite. Right. They're a good. I mean, right now I have them as the third best Big 12 team behind Texas Tech and Kansas. I even have them above West Virginia by a slot. But the thing is, how much can you win with one? And it's not just one guy, obviously, but it is the Trae Young show. Let's call it what it is. Yeah. The guy is averaging over 30 points a game. He's got 4.5 rebounds a game, 10 assists a game, and unfortunately, he's also got almost 5 turnovers a game. This guy puts so much weight on his shoulders, you wonder how far a team like that can go. And not to say that guys by themselves have not carried teams a long way. Look at Danny Manning back in the 80s. A more recent example would be Steph Curry with Davidson in 2008. He took him to the regional final. So it can happen. I just don't see it that often when you see a single player that takes as much on his shoulders, especially a freshman like Trae Young, to go out there and do it all himself, because I don't think the long-term prognosis is going to be that sound.
Are their defensive numbers affected by their tempo at all?
Well, their defensive numbers, as far as the number 53 ranking that I have them at, no, it is not, because those rankings are tempo free. Yes, you're right. They do have a very up-tempo defense, or up-tempo pace. They're the fourth fastest pace in the entire country. But no, my numbers are tempo free, so that is a legitimate number. They're number 53 in defense.
Okay, and let me ask you just a question. Who's the best team in the Big 12 right now? Because that's a tough question, in your opinion.
At this point, it's hard to go against Texas Tech. I don't know how you can argue against Texas Tech. Texas Tech has done everything they've supposed to do, and yeah, they are the analytics agree. They're number 5 in the country right now, ahead of everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can make a case for West Virginia, and I think you can make a case for Oklahoma. That's a pretty strong top of the league, and I still can't believe that we're talking about Kansas being the 4th best team in this conference.
Yeah, and the analytics still like them because of that fast start. So they're actually 2nd from the analytics. Oklahoma's 3rd, West Virginia's 4th, but those are the elite. And you're talking about rankings wise, you're talking about from top to bottom a difference of 12 spots. So they're all tightly packed. And then you have a big jump back of 18 spots to Kansas State and TCU. So the elite are definitely those 4: Tech, Kansas, Oklahoma, and West Virginia.
For sure. Best conference in the country, in your opinion?
Oh boy, that's a tough one, because it's such a debatable subject on how you evaluate it. I'm always kind of an ACC guy. I always think the ACC is top to bottom the best, but there's definitely an argument to be made that the Big 12 is the superior conference, definitely.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on. We're going to talk some SEC real quick with Erik here. So, the SEC, which a lot of people were excited about, including myself, I think it's lived up to expectations. But the funny thing is, it hasn't been the teams that we thought. We thought Texas A&M would be at the top. We thought Alabama would be at the top. They're really struggling. Kentucky really doesn't look like, an elite team, in my opinion. But teams like Tennessee, LSU, Auburn, they're all stepping up and playing really good basketball. What do you think about this conference so far, and how surprised are you at teams, how well teams like LSU and Auburn are doing?
Well, I laugh because, if you would have told me at this point that number 1 and number 2 in my analytic rankings in the SEC would have been Tennessee and Auburn, I would have laughed.
Yeah.
And I probably would have laughed harder at, Tennessee was picked 13th, I think, in the SEC, and I think I probably would have laughed harder at Auburn, because Auburn has never really done much in the past, and then there was the FBI issue. So I thought Auburn was done, and to see that they're 16-1 at this point is just a complete shock to me. Meanwhile, the teams that we expected to do quite well, Alabama was one of them. They've been one of the most disappointing teams in college basketball. They're hanging back somewhere around 10th in the SEC right now, ranked 64th overall in the country. That has not come together like the Crimson Tide had hoped.
Absolutely. And Auburn was picked to finish 9th, Erik, in the preseason poll.
Yep. But after that FBI thing, I looked at that and said, well, you're not going to get Wiley. It was just a team that time and time again, Auburn just had the talent. They couldn't deliver anything. And right. I saw no reason that Auburn was going to deliver anything differently this season, but boy, they sure have. 7-0 against our top 100 right now.
Right, and that's the impressive thing, that they're doing it without Wiley. They're doing it without Daniel Purifoy, and they're doing it with this FBI situation hovering over the program. That's why it's so surprising to me. But I think this last week or so, even 2 weeks, they've kind of, in my mind, become one of these teams that's for real, because the one thing about their early season schedule, it wasn't strong. But these last few weeks, they've beaten Middle Tennessee State. They beat Tennessee. They beat Arkansas. They just beat Mississippi State, who's a solid team. So I think people are starting to believe in this team.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, all those wins you talked about, 14 wins in a row. They haven't lost a single game since November 17th, a 14-point loss on a neutral court against Temple. But how do you argue with it? I mean, we'll have to see if they can keep it going, because the wins they've got so far are fantastic. They've, like you said, the wins against Arkansas, Tennessee, Middle Tennessee, but they still have ahead of them. They have the big ones, the Giants, the year-to-year Giants from the SEC, Florida, Kentucky. We'll see how they do as this schedule moves on. But it's hard to argue with a team that wins 14 in a row since mid-November. They are for real.
Definitely. And, the next team I want to talk about real quick is LSU. I thought hiring Will Wade was great, and, he's going to build this program, but he's doing it almost immediately. Now, I don't care for bracketology now. I know you don't either, but would this team be in the tournament if its season ended today?
This team would be in the tournament if the season ended today. In fact, I'd have them as a 10 seed.
Yeah,
and they've
sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, if you look at the resume, they beat Houston, they beat Texas A&M, they beat Arkansas. They have a pretty good resume. They beat Michigan early this season. They have one of the better resumes I've seen.
They have 4 wins versus the top 50, the 4 that you just listed. That gives you a record quality of 52nd. That's pretty solid. And considering where they are in the analytics right now, they're number 39 in the country. You know where they were a year ago under Johnny Jones? They were about number 160. That is a huge improvement over the year. So they are definitely in the mix. You got to put them in. I mean, not only are they in the mix for an NCAA berth, they're in the tournament right now. The question is, can they keep delivering and keep winning games? That's, SEC is going to be extremely tough, but boy, has Will Wade done an outstanding job with the Tigers.
Yeah, and I keep saying this, if Trae Young wasn't putting up the numbers he was putting up, I think Tremont Waters would be getting a lot of more attention than he has, because he's been excellent this year.
Oh, absolutely. I agree.
Absolutely. So a couple teams I wanted to ask you about on the negative side. First of all is Texas A&M. Texas A&M was a top 5 team a few weeks ago. They've been decimated with injuries and suspensions. Robert Williams hasn't played well. I know he was dealing with a concussion. Is this the danger zone for Texas A&M? Because they're 0-5 in the SEC right now. What do you think about this team? Do you think they can get back on track?
Oh, I think they definitely can get back on track. And, the team I think of from last year, if I'm not mistaken, was Providence. Remember, Providence really had an awful start. And all of a sudden they kind of turned things on, won a big stretch of games there in February, if I remember. And then they ended up qualifying for the NCAA tournament. I think A&M could do the same thing, but the problem is you never know which A&M you're going to get from one day to the next, because the lineup changes. And it makes them a very inconsistent team to evaluate because of this guy's out or that guy's out. Looking at the numbers, Admon Gilder has missed 5 games. Robert Williams has missed 5 games. Dwayne Wilson, 3. DJ Hogue, 3. It's hard to win games when you keep swapping lineups in and out like that. And as a result, Texas A&M is 279th in consistency, and they're 348th in momentum. You know why they're 348th in momentum is because early on in the season, they had most of these guys playing all these games. And if you look at their best performances, again, all 5 of them came in the month of November. Their best game, if you remember, was on opening night when they played West Virginia and dominated them. And they had a nice game in there with Oklahoma State, won that game by 17, beat a Penn State team on a neutral court by 11. Those are nice wins, but until you can get the consistency going and the same guys, on the court at the same time, no more injuries, no more suspensions. If that doesn't happen, Texas A&M is going to continue to suffer.
Absolutely. And, the schedule doesn't get much easier coming up. They're playing Ole Miss on Tuesday, who's playing a little bit better. Then they have to play Missouri. Then they're at LSU. And then they're playing at Kansas on the 27th. So and then they have to play Arkansas. So this is a tough stretch. I mean, I don't know where they're going to be. I mean, this could be brutal and knock them out of the tournament discussion.
Yeah, they've already lost 5 in a row. I mean, they had a nice start, 11-1. But then all of a sudden they got in that SEC schedule and things have gone south. They've got to stop the bleeding. And their best opportunity is their next game. It's going to be Ole Miss. And Ole Miss is coming off a win over Florida. So, who knows? We're going to see that's going to be on Tuesday night. They got to stop the bleeding there. If they can't do that, it gets tougher. You got Missouri and LSU. And if they can't win that, it gets even tougher than that with Kansas and Arkansas.
For sure. You mentioned Florida, and I wanted to ask you about Florida, Erik, because I think Florida is a good example, and you always remind people on Twitter about this, of the entire body of work. A team like, I saw you talking about Michigan State earlier today, and somebody's saying, oh, they're going downhill. No, I mean, just look at their whole, schedule, look at their whole season. They're just going through a rough patch. Florida goes through that rough patch. They lose, I thought, 4 to 5. Now they've won 6 of 7. I know they lost at Ole Miss yesterday. Are they starting to climb back up your rankings?
Yes, they absolutely are. They got back into our top 25 a few weeks ago, or maybe about a week ago. As of right now, they're sitting at 21, but I think they got as high as 18 yesterday. But before that, they had dipped all the way down. At one point early on in December, they were in our top. I think they were 5th. I think that's as high as they got. They dipped as low as, I think, 43 or 44. That's how bad of a stretch they had. But now they've kind of turned the corner. Ever since the new year came around, they turned the corner, and they've had some nice performances. Obviously, the one yesterday was not that great, but you can't discount the fact that they had won 6 in a row prior to that loss at Ole Miss. So, I just think that Florida with Chioza and Allen and Hudson, there's just too much talent there for them not to be in the mix come March.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think they're a Final Four type team. I do, if they're locked in on defense. I think they're that good. I think that losing 4 or 5 kind of, put them on the back burner a little bit, and people thought, oh, this team's not as good as we thought. But they've won 6 of 7. They've been playing really good basketball. Before we move on, Erik, I wanted to ask you about 2 more teams. Arkansas, they did get a win yesterday against Missouri, barely. They beat them by 2, but before that, they lose 3 in a row. They really took a hit on your site, right?
They did, yeah, and that was a team that we were really high on there for a little while. They were a top 10 team.
Right.
And there were some very nice games. And then, again, they were a team that really, it wasn't so much about who they beat, it was how they beat them. And that was what got them up, and that's what my site does, is it rewards teams for winning. It doesn't really depend on who they're playing, but if you're a top 10 team and you're playing a team who's ranked 250th, you better beat them pretty badly. You better be up about 35, early second half. And that's what Arkansas did. Arkansas delivered in a lot of those cases, but all of a sudden they started to, fall back a little bit. Now all of a sudden they're 260th in momentum, and they're another inconsistent team. Since the new year, they've had the losses at Mississippi State, a loss at Auburn, a loss versus LSU, a bad loss versus LSU. That was a terrible one. Arkansas just doesn't lose at home. And in that particular game, if I'm not mistaken, I think I had them favored by 8 maybe over LSU at home. They ended up losing that game by 21. That was their second worst performance of the year, the loss to the Tigers. So, yeah, this is a team that was top 10. They dropped below 30, and that's where they are right now. They're sitting at number 32.
Yeah, in my opinion, and don't get me wrong, I do think Arkansas is an NCAA tournament team. I think they're a solid club, but I think they played a little bit over their heads early this season. They were shooting, lights out the first week or so. I mean, they were really scoring the basketball like crazy. They don't have much of a bench. I think they rely way too much on Barford and Macon. And when one of those guys struggles, they're kind of an average team. I mean, both those guys have to play well for them to be an upper echelon team in this conference. Do you agree with that?
I absolutely do agree with that. Yeah,
definitely. So the last team I want to let's move on here. Last team is Kentucky. Kentucky has a good record. They have some nice wins, but do you look at this team as like a legit Final Four type team right now? Because I don't.
Well, the thing about Kentucky is they're slowly figuring things out because they are so young. So, the funny thing is about Kentucky is, Kentucky I've never been high on all year. And, I've been looking at one point I remember seeing on the TV, it was a Kentucky game, about a month ago, and they were ranked 7th in the country. And I went and I said, this is not a 7th best team in the country by far. But now they're starting to figure things out a little bit more. They've won 5 of 6. They lost the game against Tennessee back in the 6th, but they're putting things together a little bit better, and the analytics are seeing that. And as a result, all of a sudden, Kentucky now is the 4th best team in the SEC, and they're top 25. They're the number 23 team in the country. That's about as high as they've been all year, and you can see they were going back into early December, they were hovering in the 50 to 75 range. they were just not playing very good basketball at all. But it seems like ever since that loss to UCLA, they've kind of turned things around. They're like I said, they're 23 now and they're rising steadily. So I think a lot of us figured that that young team of Kentucky, that Kentucky team would figure things out over time, and it seems like they kind of are doing that right now. So I would not discount them still winning the SEC outright.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, they're super duper young this year, as we know. You know, last year they had some veterans. This year they really don't. Wenning Gabriel played sparingly last year, so I don't know how much of a veteran you can call him. And I wouldn't be surprised. You know, they're getting, like you said, they're getting better and better. But right now, I just don't look at them and say this is a legit title contender Final Four team like you usually do with Kentucky. But right now,
right, and I don't think. Yeah, and I don't think Kentucky fans would even argue with you. That's the thing I've noticed about Kentucky fans is in the past, they almost took offense last year when I had Kentucky rated around 10th or 11th with that team with Bam and Fox and Monk. They took offense to that. I remember at one point this year I had Kentucky in the 40s or somewhere around. I was waiting for Kentucky fans to step up and say, "What are you doing?" But most of the Kentucky people I knew came back and said, "Yeah, they're probably appropriately ranked in that spot. They just have not demonstrated the Kentucky team they expected to see." And now, finally, I think now Kentucky's starting to look a little bit more like they should.
For sure. All right, so let's move on here. We're going to talk about the Pac-12 real quick. Just real quick, breaking news, Erik. U.S. Trojan Fury 46, Utah 22 at halftime.
Oh, wow, nice. They need one like that.
Destroying Utah. Right.
They definitely need
Utah
one
right now.
That's good.
That's good news. Both of these teams need a win. Both of these teams. Utah has kind of taken a step back. They kind of look like a tournament team sometimes, but very inconsistent, in my opinion. So Looking at this conference, Erik, it's so funny. It's almost like every few days, like these teams take turns on being the talk of the conference. You know, Washington was the talk of the conference for a little bit. Now it's Colorado. Before that, it was, UCLA for a couple days. But, there's just so much inconsistency in this conference. And, I wouldn't be shocked if you see, 3 bids again, something like that. But there, you still have Arizona and Arizona State at the top. I know Arizona, has a lot of chemistry issues. Sean Miller's been talking about these guys don't care. They don't want to play for me. But, what do you think about this conference as a whole? Because, like I said, it's like every other couple days you think, okay, this team's good, and then they lose 2 in a row. What do you think? It's just been an absolute mess.
Yeah, it has been, because last year at least you kind of had the elite teams. You had the UCLAs and the Oregons and the Arizonas. I don't know if I'd even say Arizona or Arizona State are playing elite ball right now. I mean, there's not a single Pac-12 team in my top 25 right now. Not a single one.
Wow.
Arizona is 26. They're our top team. So I wouldn't say there's anybody elite. There's just so much mediocrity involved, I guess I would say. I mean, there's one team that's really atrocious. That's Cal. But when you look at it from top to bottom, there's so much mediocrity. I mean, you got Oregon State, even Colorado and Stanford. And there's nothing there really. I mean, in looking at their entire body of work, it's not impressive. And then teams you would expect to possibly be better just aren't there. UCLA and USC, those are 2 teams that if you would have said at this point in the season that, hey, UCLA would have been top 10 or USC would have been top 10, you would have said, yeah, that makes sense. But here they are. They're not close. They're not close right now. So it's just, to me, it seems like there's just so much mediocrity going on with the Pac-12. There's nobody standing out like they did last year with Oregon and Arizona and UCLA.
Yeah, 2 teams I wanted to key in on, though. One is Stanford. Stanford certainly started off the season rough, but they've been dealing with a lot of injuries. They're finally healthy now. They've won 4 games in a row, and they look like a pretty solid team, and they're 4-1 in conference. So have they moved up at all in your rankings?
They're still not doing that great. They're still 10th in the Pac-12, 119th overall, and this is going to fall in line with kind of the Michigan State stuff we talked about. How I always say college basketball fans have a very short memory. 2 weeks ago, people were chastising me for saying, well, Michigan State's far and away number 1. Now I got laughed at because I had them at number 6. Oh, they're nowhere near as good. They've had horrible performances. Well, you got to, again, entire body of work. You have to look at what they've done in November, what have they done in December, and now what have they done in January. Stanford has won 4 in a row. That's great, but you got to keep in mind the Stanford team started the year 4-6, including losses to, and I'm going to throw these teams out. They're not impressive. Eastern Washington, Long Beach State, and a loss at Cal against Cal. Those are very, very painful losses. So while they have won 4 and they are doing better, they have still inflicted so much damage on themselves early on in the year. It's going to be tough to recover from that.
Eric, this is funny because Colorado is the team I really wanted to talk to you about, and it's because of the whole body of work. And, don't get me wrong, Colorado's beaten Arizona State, and UCLA the last week, correct?
Yep.
But if you look at the entire body of work, they also lost to Colorado State. They lost to San Diego.
Yep.
They lost to Iowa. They almost lost to Quinnipiac. So, you can tell us all you want about, oh, look at all these wins, but you got to talk about these losses too.
Absolutely. They've won. You talked about the wins against the 2 Arizona teams and then UCLA as well. Those are great, but Colorado has still lost 4 of 7. They've lost 7 of 12. And as a result of those losses, they are, barely above Stanford. They're 9th in the Pac-12 and 113th overall. Again, if you're sitting at 113th, you're not getting an at-large. You got to do more.
Right.
So again, those wins are nice. Those are resume builders, but they've still got a long way to go to be in consideration for an at-large bid out of the Pac-12.
Absolutely. Like you said, like we were talking about, they're like the perfect example of an entire body of work discussion. Because, look, Arizona State's beat, look at who Colorado's beat lately. Well, look who they lost to early in the season.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I totally agree.
Definitely. All right, so let's move on here. We got a couple more conferences we got to talk about before we get out of here. The American Athletic Conference. So, Wichita State and Cincinnati clearly 100% look like NCAA tournament teams to me. That's not debatable. It's not even an argument. Then you have this group, okay, Eric, of Houston, Central Florida, SMU. What do you think about that group of teams? Because they've been up and down. SMU looked strong early. Now they've lost a handful of games. Houston's been pretty solid. UCF, I don't know what you have there. They have a terrible offense, tremendous defense. They look like a good team one night, a pretty mediocre team the rest. What do you think about that group right there? That group behind Cincinnati?
Well, yeah, I think Houston's always been a team that's kind of been, the analytics have always liked them in the past. They've always been right there in the bubble, and they just haven't quite done enough. Right. I have hopes that this Houston team can finally jump in this year. And right now, I think they probably would be, in the discussion. I think they might actually, if you look at my bracketology right now, let me see if I can follow there. They're in right now as an 11 seed. They've got a 14-3 record, and the question is, do they have enough big wins? They've got a win over Arkansas, very nice win over Arkansas, a win over Providence, but you can't afford to lose too many games in the AAC. The AAC is not very powerful. I think you have a grand total of 5 teams that are in the top 100. So if you start losing games to the likes of UConn or Memphis or, God forbid, South Florida or East Carolina, those are going to be very, very costly losses. They can't afford those types of losses. But looking at what they've done so far and where they are today, they've done enough to get in. But they have to keep winning, obviously, to get that at large. If they, assuming they don't win the conference tournament.
Okay.
Now,
here's my
talking about SMU.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. Tell us about SMU. Then I'm going to ask my question. Go ahead.
Yeah, SMU is a team that was at one point comfortably in, playing great basketball, but now all of a sudden a loss at Tulane, who's number 151, a loss at Cincinnati, and then a loss against their number 106 Temple. Those are costly losses, and I don't think things are going to get any better because now SMU has to go to Wichita State on the 17th. So you're probably looking at 4 losses in a row now, and SMU has fallen behind Houston in our rankings. They're 4th in the AAC, but what was a team that was looking really, really great about a week or two ago, all of a sudden not so great anymore, 12-6.
Right. Here's my question for you, and I think this would be an absolute devastation for this league because with Wichita State coming in, everybody was excited. It's a better league. We're going to get 4 or 5 NCAA bids. How shocked would you be if this league got 2 bids again this year?
Absolutely not shocked at all. And it is kind of too early to say because not shocked at all. because I would be interested to see it. It really depends on what Houston and SMU do. And I think one of those will emerge. And God, it's really tough for me to say because Houston looks like the team right now, but I believe in SMU. SMU is going through a tough time right now. I still think that one of those two is going to make it through, and they will get 3 bids out of the AAC.
Okay.
But if you told me in March that the AAC was only getting 2 bids, no, it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. We're losing your connection a little bit, Erik, so I just wanted to let you know that.
Okay.
I'm having a little tough time hearing you.
Okay.
So, we're going to have to move on here real quick. Let's see if we can get you clear here for the Big Ten. So you ready to take out the trash?
Absolutely. Can you hear me now?
Now, we're still having a little trouble. So why don't we wrap up? We'll do the Big Ten next time. Is that okay with you?
That's cool. Sorry about that.
No problem. It happens with Google Hangouts sometimes. But again, thank you for joining tonight. We covered plenty. We're almost done anyway, so we're going to wrap up a little bit early tonight. Again, that's Erik Halsam from HaslamMetrics.com, at HaslamMetrics on Twitter. If you guys have any questions about bracketology, analytics, anything, I definitely recommend you give him a follow and also ask him any questions you want. He's always available on Twitter. Erik, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Tony. Have a great night.
All right, we'll talk to you later. All right, guys, we'll be back next week at about same time, Sunday night, weekly recap. I'll have a new guest on. We're getting right into the meat of the season here. We're going to be talking about a lot of bracketology, I'm sure, within the next few weeks. Still got to build those resumes up before we really dive into it. So thanks so much for listening tonight, and we'll talk to you later. Thanks.